everyone, Alex at Coram Farm. We are a year 4 Oklahoma flower farm that sells retail market bouquets from our roadside stand. And in today's video, we wanted to give you a free glimpse of what we get up to over on Patreon. And one of the things we do every month for our subscribers is we record a Q&A. And all of those questions are submitted by our Patreon subscribers. I gather them all up and I answer every single question. And it's really fun because then it allows me to see what you guys are struggling with, what you want more information about, what everyone's thinking about. And this one that we're about to post for you was recorded back in September, and I was super pregnant. I think I gave birth like 2 weeks after we posted it. But it's a really great Q&A because we cover all sorts of topics with flower farming. We talk about irrigation, fertilizing, crop planting in a tunnel. We talk about social media and marketing and how to sell your flowers. It's a really great Q&A. And if you like it and you want more content like this, we have all of that over on Patreon. It's a great archive built up at this point. So when you sign up, you actually get access to all of our back archive, which includes 7 months of Q&As, hours of behind the scenes footage, PDF downloads, tons of goodies for you to binge, especially you people up in the north that are still like snow on the ground and cold and you want to binge content and prepare for your flower farming year. I think it's awesome over on Patreon, and it's also really budget friendly for all of us that are trying to be profitable and be wise with our money. It's just like put your toe in the water kind of investment. So if you're interested in that, I will put the link in the description, but if you just want to watch a good Q&A, we'll post it now. Well, it is time for our September question and answer. I have all of your questions consolidated here. There's 20 questions, so I'll be able to get through all of them hopefully. And there's some really good questions. So we're going to go through the answers. It's just me because Eric is we're dividing and conquering right now because Eric's working on a video edit for you guys as well. It is going to be our field teardown process, like a Cliff Notes walk-through version of what we do to end our season and flip our rows and get ready for fall planting, or for it to just rest and overwinter. So he's working on that video edit, and I thought that was a better use of his time, getting that video out and ready for you guys so that I can just be working on the questions. And a lot of these questions are ones that I can just answer without him because it's not a lot of like technical stuff that he tends to be in charge of on the farm. But let's jump in and get started here. I'm a little sniffly because I'm 37 weeks pregnant right now, and the kids got me sick with like a very toddler-esque cold. So I'm a little sniffly and I sound a little bit different, but that's because I'm very pregnant and also sick, which is a fun combo to have. Love it. But first question, someone asked for the planting and care of Celosia. We love Celosia on our farm. The reason we love Celosia is because Celosia loves the heat and it's not very finicky about its soil. It's a pretty tough flower, and because we live in Oklahoma that gets so hot, it's a great choice. People that live in other climates though can struggle with Celosia, particularly like in the Pacific Northwest and other places that don't get really hot for a long period of time. Your Celosia tends to be a bit smaller, or you're definitely not going to get as many cuts as we would in a warmer climate. So I don't know where you're growing, but if you're in a warmer climate, Celosia is like a must grow in my mind for this summer because of how many cuts you get on it. But you can start Celosia from seed. We do everything from plugs on our farm, but Celosia you can start from seed. It's like a 6-week before plant out timing. The seeds are really small, but they tend to germinate fairly well, and they come in great colors and stuff. I prefer to grow the Selway series of Celosia. So you have like the brain shaped ones, and then you have like a Pampas plume, which looks more like a flame, and then you have Selway, which almost looks more like maybe like a cattail, like it's thinner. I prefer that one because I like the stem color, I like the leaves, and I like that the bloom is a bit smaller. I find that Pampas plume, unless you're like cutting really hard on them, the bloom can almost get so big and like almost ratty that it kind of looks weird in a bouquet because you're kind of like, what is this? And they can get kind of funky looking, but that's just my preference. You'll have to trial what you like. But we plant out our Celosia after last frost once it's also fairly warmed up. So like I'm really not trying to push it with Celosia because if you think of it kind of like tomatoes, if you plant them too early, even if your frost is technically over, but your soil is still really cool and the lows are still really cool at night, they're not going to be as happy and they're going to get more stunted, and you're actually going to forfeit better growth later by trying to push the envelope. So I don't tend to plant our Celosia until, so like our last frost would be April 15th. I'm not really planting Celosia until the end of April, early May, when the lows are a bit warmer and our daytime temps are warmer, because that's going to make them take off and be much happier. We plant into landscape fabric with drip irrigation like we do for all of our summer stuff. And with Celosia, that's not the brain coral shaped ones, the coxcomb ones, but the other varieties I mentioned, you want to pinch them. So they'll send out a little bud and you'll be like, ah, why is it blooming? It's so short and tiny. You want to pinch it. It keeps it branching, kind of like a zinnia. And then you just want to keep cutting hard on it because you don't want to let it go to seed, because then it just kind of makes a mess on your customer's table and stuff with their bouquets when the seeds drop and all of that. And typically what you want to do with Celosia is you do a little bit of like the wiggle test like you do with a zinnia. You want to make sure that the upper part of the stem is not super floppy because it can flop post-harvest. You want to wait until that stem feels a little bit more woody and rigid before you cut. And then you just keep cutting hard on them and they should go for a long time. We don't succession plant Celosia. If you're cutting hard on them, you probably don't need to, but if you also are wanting to go for a thicker stem, you might want a succession plant to keep having some of the bigger blooms, versus as it branches, sometimes the stems can get thinner. And so it's just like a smaller stem and bloom for you, but really, really like Celosia. So that's my advice on Celosia. The next question is a little more personal. Someone asked, what is my background in gardening and am I self-taught? So my husband Eric served in the Air Force for 20 years. He retired a couple years ago. And at each house we moved to, I think we moved, I don't know, like 5 or 6 times in 10 years sort of thing when I was with him. And at each house, I started gardening more and growing more, and the gardens got bigger and bigger. And so I'm self-taught. It was over the course of maybe 7 years that I was learning before we launched like the flower farm that I was gardening. But it was probably the last year or two before we started the farm that I really started focusing on. Hi, baby. Can you leave? I don't want that in. Okay. Thank you, honey. It was not until the last year or two that the garden got a lot bigger and I was like, I want to do this. And I was trialing all the cut flower varieties and all of that. But yeah, self-taught and just reading and consuming a lot of flower farming content. And then ultimately just hands-on experience of just observing and trying to get better each year. Because obviously we're just finishing our year 3. Year 3 Alex is a much better flower farmer than year 1 Alex was. And that was just because of experience. I think sometimes it's you can't launch perfectly, you know, as an expert. You're learning each year. But yeah, self-taught. My mom has a wonderful green thumb and she knows all about plants and she's really talented, but in more of a like a garden and landscape context rather than flower farming. But she loves plants and beautiful gardens and stuff, so I've been around it a lot, and so I appreciated it and then wanted to try myself and go the flower farming route. Next one. What is my posting schedule for social media? Are there other forms of social media that bring in our customers? And do I have marketing tips? So my main tips are going to be in that Social Media 101 series we did over on YouTube. We did a part 1 and a part 2. That gives you really all the information that I would share about marketing, both what we do and then like what I recommend and the tips. And I think, and at least I hope it's helpful and it's approachable, especially if you're starting with marketing. So I would definitely go and watch those and just kind of have like a pen and paper and take notes, because I think each of them is like an hour long and I go through stuff. But my schedule is I post every day. I post every day and I post in the morning. I try to post by like 7 a.m. because I want to get people as they're waking up and they're kind of like scrolling their Facebook feed before their day gets started or they get to work. They're kind of seeing our content fresh right there that morning, and they come to expect that, and the algorithm works to our benefit. And so that's what I do. I don't necessarily like live post at 7 a.m. So like the night before, I might schedule a post. That's a really helpful feature to do, so you can hit that time you would like to post and have it go up, but maybe you're busy in the morning and you can't, do it right away yourself. You can do the schedule post. You can even schedule a couple days in advance, but I do one main feed post on Facebook every day, every morning. And then I try to do maybe like 2 stories. Sometimes if it's like a really busy day of exciting things, I might have 3 or 4, but I try to do 1 or 2. Sometimes it's even the same picture that I posted in the main feed, because sometimes you'll have people that don't see the main feed post, but they might click the bubbles up at the top on their Facebook app to look at that. On Instagram, I usually do a cross post of those same stories, but I don't post daily on Instagram. So again, watch that video to explain why I post daily on Facebook, but I wouldn't necessarily on Instagram. I kind of go through a longer discussion of the different uses of those platforms. Those are the main ones we use. And then we have a newsletter. We use Flowdesk as our email platform. And I kind of dropped off on doing that. I was naughty, and I did really great in the spring and summer when we were selling a lot, and then we took our break and things started to wind down. And so I kind of dropped off a bit on the newsletter. So I kind of need to get that reactivated. But honestly, all of our customers find out about stuff through Facebook, and that's our main feed. I mean, just so you have it, I have like a Google business profile. I have a Yelp profile, I have a Nextdoor profile, Instagram, Facebook, and email. But the most active is Facebook, followed by Instagram, I would say. And then, I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting anything. I know people swear by their email lists, and I do think they have value, and we're working towards building ours up. But I mean, we have 10,000 followers on Facebook, and I have like 1,000 emails. So the reach is just so much higher on Facebook. And that's, I think, how people are purchasing like a flower stand bouquet sort of experience. I'm not trying to get wedding work or attracting florists or those sorts of customers that maybe are going to shop differently for those sorts of purchases. Like a $25 indulgent bouquet pickup is very much like a Facebook world sort of purchase versus like a custom floral arrangement, or even like a subscription purchase that's in that, $100 plus, or wedding work, that sort of thing. You're probably going to want more of like a Facebook, or a website landing page, and your Instagram is probably going to look a bit different if you're attracting florists, that sort of thing. And again, I talk about it in those videos, so hopefully that would be helpful, especially take some notes. And maybe the hope of those videos is to make marketing feel less overwhelming, because I know that's a big component for being a successful flower farm that we often forget, because we're so focused on actually growing the flowers, we forget about the marketing. And so I wanted those videos to make it feel achievable and less stressful. But I will also say is on my list of downloads that I want to create for you Patreon wonderful people is like a 1-page social media helper, like give you ideas of what to post, give you a sample schedule for the week, kind of do some of that work for you where you can kind of cut and paste a bit until you start getting more comfortable and feeling like you can more easily come up with post ideas, because I know that can be hard in the beginning, like, well, what do I post? Or is this picture good enough? Or what should I say? That sort of thing. I kind of want to create a resource to get you launched, because I get it. I'm sympathetic. Marketing can be tricky. It can feel overwhelming, or you're just maybe shy or just lacking confidence in what to put up there. So I'll be working on that. Next question. Is it okay to plant tulips into composted manure? I think she commented that compost was hard to come by in her area, and that's what she has. The answer is yes, but you need to make sure that that compost is not hot, which means it has been sitting and composting for a long time, because a hot manure compost will burn your bulbs and they won't do well. And so it needs to be like really aged. And so you would need to check with that supplier on how hot it is, how long it's been composting. It really needs to be well broken down for that to be a good option. If it's not, I wouldn't I would not do that. And I would go with in-ground planting, or like a raised bed garden mix that you can get your hands on, which is typically like a compost topsoil mix if you're going the raised bed route. But I would not risk it with hot compost, because that just will create all sorts of mess for you and your bulbs. This is my grammar problem. How do we water our plants? Do we ever use sprinklers instead of drip? And how did that work out? So everything is on drip except for tulips. I hand water because we build our beds right next to one of our water hydrants, and we have a hose attachment, and so I'll just like hand water as we need to throughout the winter if we're not getting enough like snow melt, or when they start to break through the surface and really start needing more water, I can just hand water them. But everything else is on drip. We have done wobblers before, which is sprinklers, and I did not like it. It works for some people, but the reasons I don't like it are, one, we live in Oklahoma and it's pretty windy. And so even if we set the wobblers to go off at like 4 or 5 a.m., the slightest breeze, when I would look at the field, I just would see like the mist of water like blowing either past the field or only blowing one direction. So then like the other direction wasn't getting water. It wasn't like a good 360. And it just felt like we were wasting a lot of water. We'd have to run the wobblers for so much longer than the drip because you have to account for like evaporation, and it's just not as efficient. And so I just didn't really like it. Another problem is wobblers would not work in the summer for us because of how hot and humid we get. Whenever you have top watering onto the leaves, you increase your chance of like powdery mildew and fungal issues on the leaves versus keeping the water down at the roots. So I didn't want to risk that. And then if you're thinking about wobblers with spring, you also don't want your flowers getting wet as much, because then that can tarnish or brown the edges of your blooms and stuff, kind of like with snapdragons and lisianthus and stuff. And so for me, from a quality standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, drip irrigation is the way we go, and we're not going to go the wobbler route. We have wobblers on our peonies because that's a bit different with like them being perennials and just needing to get them water, especially after they bloom. We're not usually having to water them during their bloom time. It's just keeping the foliage alive. We've got wobblers out there, but in our tunnel, in our field, for our sunflowers, it's all drip. We can reuse our drip typically 2 years, and then we replace it. But from a cost standpoint, the actual drip tape and stuff is fairly small compared to, other stuff we spend money on. And so depending on where you live and how much you're having to irrigate and how much natural rain you get, for example, like we don't really get much rain, so it's a lot on us to irrigate. Drip is just the best way to go. If it's for you, you're only having to irrigate a couple times a month because, just in case if there's not enough rain, maybe that would work, because then it's a lot faster for you to set it up and you can just hit the field with, every other week with some extra water that you're not getting supplementally. That would be a different decision to consider. But for us, we're running drip like every other day from like beginning of June on. That drip is the best choice for us. And if you're in a warmer climate with the humidity issues and the powdery mildew, and then if you have any wind, all of those reasons, I just think drip is better. Next, pest control. They mentioned hearing that I said our plan in the tunnel next year is when we have signs of pests like aphids and stuff, we are going to cull the plant, which means we're going to just rip up that plant, burn it, get it out of the tunnel as our main method to deal with the pests. And they had asked, would we consider using other methods, and do we ever use non-organic methods? We're definitely going to spray in the tunnel, like preemptively. We use a pyrethrin spray. Typically, we rotate it with another one that's escaping me. We will spray to help a bit preventatively, try to get on top of like the eggs or like the just hatching cycle. But if I come across, like, let's say a ranunculus that has a decent amount of aphids that I can see, and they're adult aphids, it's not worth it to try to find what is going to kill them because they reproduce so quickly and they spread so quickly that I would rather lose that one plant and get all of those adults and all of those eggs and get them out of the tunnel and burned versus leaving them alive to spread to other plants while I wait for the chemicals to work. And that's what Jenny Marks does, who I've had on the channel before, and she grows, I think, like 10,000 ranunculus a year. And so I'm kind of deferring, knowing that she has tried a bunch of other things, and that's the best to quickly stay on top of things, because especially with like aphids or thrips, things can get out of control so quickly in a tunnel because they love that environment so much that I would rather, even though it sucks, I would rather lose like the dollar Coram and, you know, the $10, $15 I could maybe make off of that one plant and get it out of there versus having a spread. And that's what happened to us this year. We didn't have an infestation, but there definitely was like, I saw the aphids on a couple plants, and then by the end of it, we had a whole block of maybe like 20, 30 plants that became not harvestable. And it would have been better if I pulled like the 2 or 3. Then we did a bunch of sprays. We tried to get on top of it and we controlled the spread a bit, but I still ended up losing like harvest on like 20 plants because of that. And so we're going to do the cull method. We will use non-organic sometimes in the perimeter of our fields in areas where we know a lot of the breeding grounds are for some things, where there are not like active blooms, there's not active pollinators. It's in some of our grasses where we have realized in our property, like white flies and stuff, where they like to hatch and get started. We will sometimes spray a stronger synthetic pesticide there to kill them before they can get to the plants and the blooms and all of that. But when we're talking about the plants themselves, the flowers themselves, we try to stick to organic on principle, because I'm handling them. We're giving to our customers as part of our marketing of, we're different than grocery store flowers. Like our plants are not covered in pesticides, that sort of thing. And in order to do that, it does mean that we're going to have to cull plants in order to not have to spray so much. Another person had asked in a separate question if we would do like beneficials and release lacewings for thrips and stuff like that. Not against it. We might even try it this year. Part of the problem is like getting the timing correct and how you can release things and then like they'll totally leave. And some of it, is you're supposed to close the tunnel and release them, let them get going, sort of thing. And because we get warm so quickly here, it's really tricky timing where like it's not too cold for the bugs to actually live, but that it's not so warm outside that we can't leave the tunnels closed, because the tunnels heat up so fast, especially if the sun is out. It's a little bit tricky of like how we can release those beneficials to actually be beneficial and not just have them, like you release ladybugs and like they all just disappear and leave. But that could be a winter research project for us, maybe if there's a couple we wanted to try. But again, I think the scouting daily and culling quickly when we see adults or we see a problem, I think will end most of our issues. That's what I'm telling myself. And I think it's true. That's also what Jenny told me to do. So I'm going to basically do what she says to do, especially when it comes to tunnel growing flowers. Next question is, do we water our tunnel in the winter? And if so, how often? Yes. So when we plant the ranunculus in November, I don't pre-sprout. You can watch our ranunculus video to see our process. I don't pre-sprout. I soak them and do all of that. And then I just plant them. And then I give them a really deep soak. So we already have drip lines on the soil. I don't plant into fabric. I plant into just, freshly floofed, tilled soil in our tunnel. I plant them. We give them a really deep saturating soak. And then I just monitor the soil, like the finger method, where I don't want them always sitting in moisture, but I don't want them to get to the point where the soil can be crumbly and dry out, because then the corm itself will desiccate. And so it's not really something where I can say like water every other week sort of thing. You really have to be looking at your own soil, because if you're really sandy, you're definitely going to have to water more than we will, because we have more clay, and so the dry out rate is much slower for us. You really just need to be testing until the corms have like sprouted and they're growing above soil. You want to make sure you know that that's where you get the rot risk, and so it's a little bit of a finicky, like, is this too much water? But I think as long as you stick your finger down 2 inches, which is about where the corm is, if there's moisture, it's good. If it's crumbly dry, I think it should have moisture. If it's like wet, you know, you might be risking a little bit of rot issue and you want to pull back. That's one of the reasons why some people pre-sprout, is they get ahead of that process, and so the rot risk is lower because the corm itself is already sprouted and it's pretty quickly going to be growing out of the soil, or already is, and then the rot risk goes down. But just test the finger test. I would say maybe, I'm honestly trying to remember, that's why I'm pausing here. Every couple weeks, maybe we would water over winter meaning December, January. But then we started having decent greenery growth in February. And so then that watering became more frequent, because in where we are at in Oklahoma, our ranunculus blooms end of March, early April. And so ranunculus are very thirsty once they get going. So once they break dormancy and they're really starting to put on that green foliage growth, they do want a lot of water. And so we were having to water. If you're in an area where you're overwintering, but your ranunculus don't bloom until like the end of April, you're probably not going to be watering as much in February, because you're really cold and the corms are in more of a dormancy and not an active growth period. So that also kind of matter. But really, I know that's not the easiest, because I like to have, you know, instructions I can follow and copy. That's my personality as well. But you have to test with your own moisture levels and what's going on with your climate. Just don't let them dry out. Next question. This person is getting a heated greenhouse, and she asked, if I remember, she has a short growing season. So like frost date is really late, and then first frost is pretty quick. So it's a short growing season. She has a heated greenhouse. If I had a heated greenhouse, what would I plant in it? It wouldn't be different for me than an unheated greenhouse, to be honest. I would do tulips in your tunnel. Like I would do probably tulips in crates outside, let them get their chill hours, keep them well watered. And then I'd move the crates inside once they've hit the chill hours into the heated space to get them going. So I would do tulips in crates. I would do ranunculus, anemones, campanula. I would succession plant snapdragons, so you constantly had them. I would do, I don't have experience growing it, but I would work towards learning how to do stock well, because it does so well in a tunnel. So I would do like a trial patch of stock to figure out that timing before I did a much bigger one. I would do, I'm just thinking through my list. We don't grow so many varieties because I don't want to grow a ton of varieties. So I would just do like a bigger quantity of all of those things. I would even try succession planting, like do 2 plantings of ranunculus, 2 of anemones, a bunch of snapdragons. Campanula you would plant all at once. I would do bupleurum for some greenery. That's what I would do, and I would do a lot of it. But that would be fun. Having a greenhouse when you have a shorter growing season will be awesome for you. Next question. Do we amend our soil at the beginning, and do we fertilize weekly? So we add compost when Eric is doing the rows. He will add compost, and we don't do a ton of compost, and we more top dress it and rake it in rather than put a ton of compost and like do a deep till. Eric will include this in his field prep video, but typically we tear down, we till, We rake it smooth and then we cover it for the winter. And then that's when we do our till, is in the fall. And then in the spring, we uncover it. We do our, a couple inches of compost on top of what has been tilled. And then Eric kind of like rakes that in and kind of like floofs it in the top. And that's what we do for amendments. We have soil tests done and we don't have anything that's wildly out of balance. So we don't need to add like a granular fertilizer or do anything to bring our standard like soil numbers or our pH to a certain level, because our soil is pretty good. We just like to add that organic matter in with the compost. And so that's our process there. And then I do a foliar feed fertilizer once a week during the greenery stage of growth. So I stop fertilizing a flower once it's budded up and it's starting to bloom or it's blooming. I find they don't need it as much at that point for the flowers that we grow. And especially for like zinnias, it can actually increase like a powdery mildew or fungal issues if you're fertilizing once they've started to bloom. So like snapdragons, ranunculus, anemones, zinnias, marigolds, celosia, they're all getting a foliar, like a leaf fertilizer until they're blooming, and then I stop. And I find that works sufficient because our soil is fine. We've given them compost and they're getting good nutrition once a week during their like foliar build the plant stage. And then once they start blooming, I find that they're fine and they don't need anything extra. And I also am looking for ways to be efficient and cut back on costs. And I don't need to be continuing something that I don't have to from a chore perspective of, you think like, oh, it's just fertilizing once a week, but it gets hot or the bugs show up or you just get so busy because now you're harvesting so much and you're selling. It's just like one less thing. I find that when I fertilize them when they're babies, it goes pretty quick and then I can cut back when they get bigger. But do a soil test, make sure there's none of your numbers are super off and you need to do a much more particular amendment. And then if you don't, I think a top dress of compost is sufficient for most flowers. And then you can do the foliar feed for like an extra nutrient boost. And that's good. I think when you're on a smaller scale size, there can be too much fussing about the fertilizing and then also the like post-process conditioning and all the different like chemicals and stuff. I think when you're at a smaller scale, we can overcomplicate that and just end up spending more time and money than we really need for what we're trying to accomplish on our size farm versus, considerations that like a 3-acre farm might be needing to consider when it comes to like their soil management and plant health and their post-processing, and all of that gets to be a bit different conversation. So really, I'm going to be your girl to tell you to do less is what I'm saying. Next question. We're halfway through. Next question. What does our harvest look like? Do I harvest daily and put in buckets with CBVN tablets and keep until Friday? So it depends on what the flower is, but typically, yes, I harvest every day and it's going in the cooler. Up until recently, the cooler was a couple Facebook fridges and that's totally fine. Now we have a proper like bigger walk-in cooler, which is nice. So that's an actual cooler when I say cooler now. I harvest every day and then we make the bouquets Friday and Saturday morning and we sell on Saturdays. Because we added our subscriptions, it shifted a bit where like I was harvesting a lot on Monday and Tuesday morning, making the bouquets Tuesday night. Subscription pickup was on Wednesday, and then I harvested a bunch Wednesday night, Thursday, made the bouquets Friday, sold on Saturday. That was kind of the schedule. But for flowers, like tulips and stuff and peonies, where you're having to really get them at a specific time, I'm harvesting multiple times a day to stay on top of it. A flower that has a bit more wiggle room, like let's say a snapdragon, marigold, zinnias, celosia, where they can sit on the plant much longer, I'm not necessarily going out and harvesting them every single day. It's a bit unnecessary. So like I have a Wednesday subscription that I know is going to include marigolds. I'll probably just do one marigold harvest at some point before then. Same with the zinnias. Snapdragons would be like a couple times a week. So I'm making decisions based on like how much the plants need my attention in order to get like the best quality, because I can't wait a couple days for a tulip. It blows open and you lose it. So that like requires main priority. Ranunculus can stand the plant a bit more, so I don't necessarily have to harvest every single day. Now, depending on how much free time I have, it can be better to do like bite-sized chunks each day. Maybe that's better for your schedule. Or your schedule might be like, I'm going to carve out 2 hours Tuesday night to get a bunch of harvests done, make bouquets Wednesday morning, because that's what works, versus doing, you know, a little bit on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You kind of have to think about what flowers you're harvesting and what works best with your schedule. Sometimes, since we have so many kids, it is easier for me to kind of do like 30-minute little chunks versus like a 4-hour harvest. That's better for me. Someone else might be in a different situation. Maybe you know, your kids are at school, or it's a different setup where like you have a dedicated couple hours and you just want to get it all done and have them sit waiting for you. That works too. I don't use the CBVN tablets. Again, I don't do much, and I know a lot of people have like what I consider to be fairly complicated post-processing things, where like they have a solution in the harvest bucket and then they switch the water to a different solution for storage in the cooler, and then they use like this flower food in the buckets that they sell at their stand. And all I'm seeing honestly is like dollar signs and extra effort. And so I've tried to really pare it down and skip as many steps as I can for what works with what I'm trying to do, which is, excuse me, there's like a fly that's living his best life here with these lights, if you guys see him. But I try to remember I'm selling a $25 bouquet at a flower stand. I'm not holding, you know, wholesale flowers for a premium wedding florist that's expecting a different thing than what my flower stand customers are. And so what I do is I either just harvest into fresh water. It is what it is. It'll be fine. If it's going to be in the cooler for more than a day or two, I harvest directly into a bucket that has holding solution, because again, I'm not out in the field for 4 hours harvesting. I'm harvesting a couple buckets. I'm out there for 45 minutes. I'm going to harvest directly into the holding solution in the bucket. I put it on my golf cart, I drive it to the cooler, and I put the bucket in, and that's what I'm doing. I'm not doing a bunch of other things. I haven't trialed the CBVN tablets and stuff. I know why people use them, but I haven't had an issue with our flowers holding and our flower vase life to compel me to want to add, you know, an additional product. I think it's fine if you're using it. I'm just sharing this as a caution of, I think we run the risk of like overcomplicating and panicking and thinking we need like 3 or 4 different solutions, or else our flowers might wilt, because obviously we don't want that to happen. We want good quality. And I just haven't found that to be the case. Fresh water on a locally grown flower is incredible, and they're usually fine if you're going to hold them in a cooler. Say, like if I'm harvesting snapdragons on a Monday and I know I'm not going to use them until Friday, yeah, I'm going to put them in a holding solution in the cooler, because that's the proper thing to do. If I'm harvesting snapdragons on Tuesday and I'm going to sell them Wednesday to my subscribers, I'm not going through all the fuss of all of that extra stuff in the buckets, because the turnover is so quick. So just be really like questioning your process, thinking about like, why am I doing this? Is it truly helping? And, you know, and is it worth the cost? And sometimes the answer is yes, absolutely. And sometimes it might be like, no, I'm just doing it because I saw everyone else doing it, and that's why. And then it might end up saving you some money and time and all of that. But that's our harvest schedule. Depends on the flower and a little bit what's going on. But I prefer the bite-sized method rather than like big 4-hour harvest slogs. That's just not my personality, or just, you know, my life reality as a mom of lots of tinies. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you can believe it, that is actually only half of the Q&A that we recorded for September. There's another like 30-40 minutes where I answer even more questions. So if you want to watch the rest of it, you want all of our back catalog and archive, check out our Patreon in the link below. But it is a Saturday, it's cold and blustery. I just cut a bunch of our short anemones in the tunnel. They always start out shorter and I don't want to waste them. So I cut them to bring inside, which we really enjoy. Eric has been working with the kids today on building out our lot of our field rows, because believe it or not, every week from like now through April, we are getting trays and trays of plugs to plant that are going in our field. Our tunnel is pretty much full, but it's time for field planting. I am standing in our like 3 rows of a gajillion snapdragons that we're succession planting this year. And I am so excited to have flowers like up to my hip in a couple months and to open the flower stand behind me. But thank you for watching, you guys, and thank you for your support as always.